I watched my father-in-law's face turn purple as he slammed his hand on the mahogany conference table. "You're fired, effective immediately," he'd said, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. That was 7 days ago, and I still couldn't quite believe it had happened. But what I didn't know then was that 1 week later, everything would flip on its head in a way that would make him regret every single word. Let me back up. My name is Michael Chen, and until last week, I had what most people would call a pretty damn good life. I'm 38 years old, married to Jennifer for 9 years, and we live in a 4-bedroom colonial in the suburbs of Connecticut. The kind of place with a manicured lawn, a 2-car garage, and a mortgage that keeps me up at night at least twice a month. Jennifer's father is Richard Harrison, the guy who owns Harrison Development Group, a commercial real estate company that's been operating in New England for 35 years. He's the kind of man who walks into a room and people notice. Silver hair, tailored suits, the confidence of someone who's never really failed at anything. I'd been working at Harrison Development Group for 5 years. I started as a junior project manager and worked my way up to senior development director. I wasn't just good at my job, I was essential to it. I'd brought in 3 major clients, managed 2 successful office complex renovations, and had a reputation for being reliable, detail-oriented, and someone who actually gave a damn about quality. My salary was $220,000 a year, plus benefits, plus a 401k match that Richard himself had personally approved when I got promoted 3 years ago. Life was good, solid, the kind of life where you could breathe easy. Jennifer and I had built something real. We had dinner on Friday nights at that Italian place downtown where they knew our names. We took a week-long vacation every summer. Last year it was the Outer Banks. This year we were planning the Sonoma wine country. Our 2 kids, Sophie and Lucas, were in good schools. Everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. But there was this project. Richard had become obsessed with it about 8 months ago. He called it the Riverside Tower Development, a massive mixed-use building in downtown Hartford, Connecticut. Luxury apartments on top, high-end retail on the ground floor, underground parking for 500 vehicles. The price tag was north of $280 million. Richard had personally approached 3 anchor tenants, and he was convinced this was going to be his legacy project, the crown jewel of his career before he retired in 5 years. The problem was the location. I'd done the due diligence back in March, and the reports came back with serious red flags. The ground had contamination issues from an old manufacturing plant that operated there in the 1980s. Nothing catastrophic, but it would require a full environmental remediation that could add $8 to $12 million to the project costs. There was also a zoning complication with the city. The height variance they'd need would be difficult to obtain, especially given recent changes to Hartford's building codes. And the market analysis suggested that luxury apartments in Hartford, while growing, weren't ready for the price point Richard had calculated. I brought this to Richard in a formal presentation. I had charts, data, projections, expert opinions. I wasn't trying to kill the project. I was trying to save it from becoming a financial disaster. "Richard," I'd said during that meeting last month, "I think we need to either reduce the scope, adjust our pricing model, or wait another 18 months until the market stabilizes. This is a solid investment, but not at these numbers, not right now." Richard had listened, he'd nodded, he'd asked questions, and then he'd said, "I appreciate your thoroughness, Michael. Let me think about this." But what he'd actually done was talk to his wife, Margaret, and his son, Derek, who'd recently joined the company as a junior analyst. Derek had never liked me. I think it was because I got the promotion he thought he deserved, even though Derek had been with the company for only 2 years and had spent most of that time goofing off and taking long lunches. Last Tuesday, Richard called me into his office. Derek was there, along with Margaret. Richard didn't ask me to sit down. That should have been my first warning. "I've made a decision," Richard said, his jaw clenched. "We're moving forward with Riverside Tower exactly as planned. Your concerns are noted but not helpful. In fact, I think your negativity is going to be a problem for this company going forward." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "Richard, with all respect, I'm not being negative. I'm being realistic. The environmental remediation alone. I didn't ask for your input, he cut me off. His voice was quiet, which was somehow worse than if he'd yelled. Derek has presented an alternative analysis that shows the project is viable. He believes in this. He sees the opportunity. And frankly, Michael, I'm starting to wonder if your hesitation is personal rather than professional. I looked at Derek. He had this small smile on his face, the kind of smile that told me he'd orchestrated this entire thing. It's not personal, I said carefully. The data is the data. But if you want to move forward, that's your choice. I can work with whatever direction you decide. No, Richard said, and he stood up. You can't. Because I don't trust your judgment anymore. You're fired. Security will walk you out in 10 minutes. We'll mail your final check. The conference room felt like it was spinning. Richard, we should talk about this. We should discuss. We're done discussing anything, he said. And then he did that thing with his hand on the table. The thing I'll never forget. I was escorted out by a security guard, a real security guard, like I was some kind of threat. My badge was deactivated. I had to leave my laptop and my office supplies behind. The other employees wouldn't meet my eyes as I walked through the hallway. By lunchtime, the entire company knew I'd been fired. Jennifer didn't take it well. We sat in the kitchen that night, and she cried. How could he do this? She kept asking. You've given everything to that company. You built that company. I know, I said, but I was already thinking about the mortgage, about Sophie's private school tuition, about the fact that I'd been at Harrison Development for 5 years and might not have another job for months. But here's where things got interesting, because the next morning I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Is this Michael Chen? The voice on the other end asked. Yes, who is this? My name is Thomas Bradford. I'm an investigative journalist with the Hartford Advocate. I'm working on a story about Harrison Development Group, and I think you might want to talk to me. And that's when I realized that Richard's firing me wasn't the end of anything. It was actually the beginning of something much, much bigger. I sat in Thomas Bradford's office the next morning, and my hands were shaking so badly I had to grip the armrests of his chair to keep them still. Thomas was in his early 50s, the kind of journalist who looked like he'd seen everything and believed nothing without proof. His desk was covered in files, sticky notes, and at least 4 empty coffee cups. What I'm about to tell you, he said, leaning back in his chair, is going to change everything. But I need you to understand something first. Once we go down this road, there's no going back. You're going to have to be willing to testify, to go on record, to have your name attached to this story. Are you prepared for that? Tell me what you have, I said. Thomas opened a manila folder and slid it across the desk. Inside were financial documents, email chains, and what looked like architectural renderings. Harrison Development Group has a problem, he began, a serious one. Your father-in-law, Richard Harrison, has been falsifying environmental reports for the past 3 years. He's been submitting altered remediation assessments to the state, underreporting contamination levels, and bribing an inspector named Walter Castellano to sign off on properties that never actually passed inspection. My stomach dropped. You have proof of this? Better than that, Thomas said. I have Walter. He came to me 2 weeks ago. He's been cooperating with the State Attorney General's office for the past 6 months. He kept detailed records, email confirmations, photographs of deposits. There's a federal investigation underway right now, and it's going to be public within the next 72 hours. You're firing, Michael? That wasn't random. Richard found out that Walter was getting nervous, and he wanted to surround himself with people he controlled completely. Derek was already on his side. You were a liability because you actually knew the data. I felt like the room was tilting. The Riverside Tower project is going to bankrupt the company once the contamination levels are disclosed, Thomas finished. The environmental remediation will cost more like $28 million, not $8 million. The state's going to levy fines. There will be lawsuits from the anchor tenants who signed contracts based on false information. Richard's looking at potential criminal charges, fraud, bribery, falsification of public documents. Why are you telling me this? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Because you're the only senior employee who ever raised concerns about this project. You documented your objections. You presented data. You were right, and you were fired for being right. When this story breaks, I want to tell it accurately, and that means getting your side. It means showing that there was at least one person at that company with integrity. Over the next 3 days, I gave Thomas everything. My presentation to Richard, my email correspondence, the original environmental reports that I'd kept copies of. I agreed to go on record. I agreed to let him use my name, and I waited. The Hartford Advocate story broke on Friday morning. The headline was massive. Harrison Development Group under criminal investigation. Years of falsified environmental reports, bribery alleged. Thomas had done devastating work. He'd interviewed Walter Castellano, who described in detail how Richard had approached him in 2021 with a proposition. Underreport the contamination levels, sign off on fraudulent assessments, and receive $50,000 per project. Walter had done it for 3 years, pocketing $150,000 until his conscience finally broke him. The article included my name. It quoted my original presentation to Richard. It showed the contrast between what I'd warned about and what had actually happened. By Saturday morning, I'd received calls from 3 different attorneys offering to represent me in potential litigation. By Monday, the State Attorney General's office called me directly. "We'd like to meet with you," the Assistant AG said. "We're building a case, and your documentation is crucial. We're also looking at potential wrongful termination claims on your behalf." Jennifer cried when she read the article, but these were different tears. "He did this to you," she said, looking at the printout on our kitchen table. "He fired you because you were right." "He did," I agreed, "but it's going to come out now. Everyone's going to know." What I didn't expect was what happened next. Richard's wife, Margaret, called me on Tuesday afternoon. Her voice was ice cold. "My husband would like to meet with you," she said. "Alone, today, if possible." "I don't think that's a good idea," I told her. "He wants to discuss a settlement," Margaret said, "before things go any further legally, before this destroys everything." I should have said no. I should have let my attorney handle it. But I was angry, the kind of angry that makes you stupid, so I agreed to meet Richard at a neutral location. A coffee shop in downtown Hartford, 3 o'clock. He was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth, looking like he'd aged 10 years in 1 week. His silver hair seemed grayer, his suit was wrinkled. He didn't stand up when I sat down across from him. "I made a mistake," he said without preamble. "I shouldn't have fired you. I should have listened to you." "You fired me because I threatened your project," I said. "You didn't care about being right. You cared about winning." "Yes," Richard said, and his voice cracked. "Yes, I did. And now I'm going to lose everything because of it. The company's going to be investigated. Derek's been cooperating with the authorities because he's terrified. My marriage is hanging by a thread because Margaret found out I've been paying off a state inspector for 3 years. I'm facing criminal charges." He slid an envelope across the table. $250,000, he said. "That's 6 months of your salary plus severance. I'll write you a letter saying you were terminated without cause due to a business decision. I'll give you a positive reference for any future employment. And I'm going to tell the truth to the investigators, that you warned me, that you had legitimate concerns, and that I ignored you for ego." I stared at the envelope. A week ago, I would have grabbed it. I would have taken it as vindication and moved on with my life. But something had shifted in me. "No," I said. Richard blinked. "What?" "No," I repeated. "I don't want your money. I don't want your letter. I don't want anything from you, except to watch you face the consequences of what you've done. You tried to destroy me because I had the audacity to tell you that you were making a mistake. You would have happily let me become collateral damage in your ambition. So no, I'm not taking anything." "Michael," Richard said, and he actually looked like he might cry. "Please, I'm begging you, help me." "You had the chance to help yourself," I said. I stood up and walked out of that coffee shop without looking back. The criminal charges against Richard were filed 2 weeks later. Fraud, bribery, falsification of public documents, conspiracy. The company filed for bankruptcy. The Riverside Tower project was abandoned. 3 of the anchor tenants sued for breach of contract. Derek took a plea deal and agreed to testify against his father in exchange for immunity. And me? I landed a job as Director of Development at Westbrook Properties, a firm that valued integrity and due diligence. They offered me $240,000 a year, plus a signing bonus of $60,000. They wanted someone who would ask the hard questions and wouldn't be intimidated into silence. Jennifer's relationship with her parents fractured, but it was a fracture that needed to happen. She couldn't respect her father anymore, and she couldn't forgive him for how he'd treated me. Her mother called once, asking if we'd consider helping them financially during the legal proceedings, and Jennifer hung up without answering. 6 months later, I ran into Margaret at the grocery store. She looked destroyed, thinner, older, her eyes haunted. She didn't try to talk to me. She just nodded, and I nodded back, and we moved on with our lives in opposite directions. Richard's trial lasted 8 weeks. I testified for 40 minutes, answering questions about my original presentation, my concerns about the project, and how I'd been fired for voicing those concerns. The prosecution used my evidence to build their case. The defense tried to paint me as a disgruntled employee with an axe to grind, but my documentation was too solid, and my motivations were too clear. Richard was convicted on 4 counts. He's currently serving 3 years in federal prison, and he'll be paying restitution for the rest of his life. But here's what I learned from all of this. Integrity doesn't always come with an immediate reward. Sometimes it comes with a cost. Sometimes you have to walk away from money, from security, from the comfortable life you've built. But in the end, you get to sleep at night. You get to look your family in the eye. You get to build a career on something real, not on the back of someone else's suffering. Richard Harrison tried to silence me for telling the truth. He thought firing me would solve his problem. Instead, it was the moment that set everything in motion. 1 week later, the world knew exactly who he was, and I was finally free.